So with that said, we are proud, mighty pleased to have as co-sponsors of this event, perhaps the Boston Red Sox most important support organization, the Bo Sox. Mr. Bogosian, come and share a moment with us, will you please?
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be with you here tonight and give you the extended greetings of the Bo Sox Club, the largest, the most active, the most vigorous, the most prestigious booster club of any baseball franchise in the world. So let's hear it for the Bo Sox Club. Now, this will not be your most enthralling message of the evening, but I want to draw your attention to the member applications that are on each table. Now, some of you may be members of the Bo Sox Club. I recognize some faces. How many members of the Bo Sox Club are there here? Yeah, that's a goodly amount. I'd say about 15 or 20, probably about 10 to 15% of the room. For those of you who are not familiar with the Bo Sox Club, let me bend your ear for a minute. All right? Just a minute, George, just a minute, all right? So I'm just warming up, George. So each year, from spring training until November, we have a series of meetings with our players, with the managers, with the coaches, with the opposing players that are coming to town. Now, you meet these players and have the opportunity to speak with them and have your autograph sessions with them and talk to them personally through a series of luncheons, picnics, dinner programs, barbecues at Fenway Park. We have a wonderful family day in which each member gets 3 complimentary tickets for an adult and 2 kids, so you can take the kids to a game in July or August. It's a wonderful benefit. Now, for those of you who have the applications in front of you, this is just hot off the wire. For those of you who sign up, who want to renew by December 20th or want to be a new member by December 20th, we're going to be offering 5 prizes in a raffle, all right? The first is that you can meet guests in a green room prior to a Bo Sox luncheon in 2014. And the lunch will be complimentary, and the lunch is worth about $35, $38. So you'll be in the green room, so you'll have an opportunity to meet with the guests of that day. And there'll be 2 winners associated with that. Secondly, EMC Club tickets. We're going to be offering 2 tickets in a raffle to a 2014 Sox game. Thirdly, field box seats. We're offering 2 tickets to a 2014 Sox game. So there's going to be 5 winners. So those of you who sign up tonight or sign up by December 20th and get your applications in, you'll be participating in this raffle. Now, here are some of the benefits of membership. Free game tickets. I mentioned that to you, a family day event. Priority access to spring training tickets and JetBlue Park Bo Sox player events. Access to game day luncheons with guests in area hotels and Fenway Park. Each July, we have a major lunch at Fenway Park. Priority access to Christmas at Fenway, which is up to 150 members. For some of you who tried to get in last year, you couldn't get in. This is a chance to buy your season tickets and buy your game tickets at the Christmas at Fenway. Discounts at Yawkey Way and JetBlue merchandise stores, and most importantly, a free Red Sox media guide, which is a $20 value. And now those of you who are going to be here tonight and have during this coming season, you're going to hear Dick Flavin. You're going to hear Dick Flavin's poems before anybody else if you come to Bo Sox Club luncheons. George, here you go.
The time for the gentleman from the Bo Sox Club has expired. When they're doing this in the green room, I'll be in the blue room handing out free autographed Red Sox team World Series championship signatures. Actually, that's not true. The Bo Sox are great, and in fact, on December 5, in the State Street Pavilion, they will join with us again because we're going to hear Ben Bradley talk about his 1,800-page, but it's actually, it's 800-page classic entitled The Kid, The Immortal Life of Ted Williams. It's going to be a great night, and Mr. Bradley, you don't know this, but I was in Scottsdale, Arizona yesterday, and at Scottsdale, at this particular place where I was, I ran into people who said, we're coming to Boston to hear Bradley on the 5th. If they're coming from Scottsdale, where do you think you're going to be? At State Street Pavilion. In this kind of shameless self-promotion, let me just say this. I do baseball notes. At the end of the year, I figured out I'd written 107,000 words, which is a 423-page book. So I'm going to offer it as an ebook. Mr. Schumann is going to be my editor, because I need an editor, as an ebook. And in order to ensure that at least 50 people buy it, we'll price it at 49 cents. I'm not really good on the commercial side of things. In any event, that'll happen. Now, here we go. First, from the Boston Globe, Pulitzer Prize winning, the great Kevin Cullen, right here. From the Boston Herald, one of our favorites, the very distinguished, handsome fellow, Mr. Steve Buckley. From Nesson, is this everybody's favorite? I'm told it is. Welcome, please, the great Jenny Dell. From the Boston Red Sox, perhaps the most creative person in the history of America's game, Vice President Dr. Charles Steinberg. From the United States Senate. From the United States Senate, one of the great public servants, not only in the history of this Commonwealth, but of this country, the Honorable Ed Markey. Now, before I introduce our moderator, I need to ask, actually, I need to say something. This wonderful painting, so many of you have had your picture taken, right? The artist is here. His name is Giovanni De Cunto. Giovanni. And because very soon they will have their own display case at Fenway Park, we have the chairman of the board of Penn New England, who is with the Kennedy Library, where on Friday night they will have a special evening remembering President John F. Kennedy, and that's Amy McDonald. Amy, stand up. And the executive director of Penn New England is Karen Wolf. Karen? So now, the moderator, I actually get to enjoy the program, and you're free of me for almost all of the rest of the evening. The voice of the, easy. I know you had your 15 minutes of fame at Houston, but seriously. The voice of the Paw Sox and the Patriots, Bob Sosek.
Well, as George said, I am the voice of the Patriots on 98.5, the Sports Hub, but started this spring before being hired by the Sports Hub to call Patriots games as one of the play-by-play voices of the Pawtucket Red Sox. And 2 years ago, in fact, sat, I think, at that table right there for a panel discussion very similar to this, one that included Steve Buckley. But it was not on the rise, but rather the fall of the 2011 Red Sox. And of course, so many storylines were spawned from that particular season. George?
Just because it would be inappropriate if I didn't introduce the final panelist. Do you know who that is? Dick Flavin.
Poet laureate. I'll take the podium. Okay. I'll stay. And we'll have to share the mics. I have two mics, so we'll share. But going back to that discussion, of course, so many storylines spawned from the 2011 September. None more infamous than that, which included the phrase chicken and beer. And of course, two figures central to that were John Lester and John Lackey. And in 2012, while Lackey watched as an injured pitcher, Lester, like the rest of his teammates, struggled through the worst season in the franchise's last 4.5 decades. But this year, of course, after Ben Cherington made a number of moves to enrich the club's character and strengthen its financial bearing and put the Red Sox on the road to collective, and as evidenced, I think, mostly by Lester and Lackey, individual redemption. And that's a big part of the theme tonight, redemption for this great baseball franchise, which, of course, you're also passionate about. And these gentlemen up here, and lady, know the Red Sox far better than I do, have the finger on the pulse of the organization. So I'm going to mostly try to stay out of the way, introduce subjects that we can expound on, and let you guys take it from there. But I'll start with the Honorable Senator Ed Markey, because I think I want to go back to the offseason preceding 2013 and allow you to inform us a bit about your history as a Red Sox fan. Talk about the state of mind for Red Sox fan coming into 2013, considering what had taken place going back to September of 11.
Well, we were back to a pre 2004, 2007 mentality. Okay? We had lost all sense of inevitability. And we did not think that we were going from beer and wings to duck boats and champagne in just 2 years as this season started. Okay? There was just no way that was going to happen. It was, in my mind, it was actually more like 1967, much more like 1967, because we just missed in 2003 when we won in 2004. We actually had an expectation going into 2004. It wasn't something that was unexpected. We felt 2003 was the fluke when they left Pedro in. So that was a different thing. And so it took me back to 1967. And we didn't know who Billy Rohr was going to be. We didn't know who Jose Tartabull was going to be. We already had Tony C., and we had Tony Kniggle, and we had Kyle Yaz, and we had Jim Lomborg. And as each day went by, this expectation started to be created once again. But it took a while for that to happen this year. And I know because in 1967, I was at Boston College, and I drove an ice cream truck each day during the summer. And during during the incredible streak in August, I used to come over here every night, pay $5 to the Boston Red Sox gate attendant who did the press and the players' gate, and then he would pull out his car from underneath the Fenway sign, and I would change my prices from 7 cents for a popsicle to 25 cents for a popsicle outside of Fenway Park, and then go in and see the games as this thing just built. And I think that's what this year was all about. It was all about this sense of something that was unlikely, that was unfolding, and it took a while for us to want to be part of that again. And I think that Dr. Charles had a lot to do with that after the marathon bombing in creating in 5 days at Fenway Park something where David Ortiz could say a word that we only thought of as a middle name for Bucky Dent and I've been on the telecommunications committee for 37 years, and I never thought I would see the day when an obscenity was uttered where the chairman of the FCC on that day would tweet that he was with Red Sox Nation and Big Papi in his sentiments that day. And I just want to give Dr. Charles, credit for just making, that quick transition for the city that I think then was captured throughout the season by the Red Sox.
I think we'll hop around a little bit and want to pick up on that note. Now, I'll go to Kevin. Please excuse me for passing in front of the panelists, because you write, I think anyone who reads your work, really from the soul of Boston. Talk about that moment at Fenway Park when David Ortiz, such an affable character, really displayed his power of personality and helped to galvanize the hub.
I've heard the word before. But I don't think I ever heard it in that it was just the right word and just the right sentiment. And obviously, if we can all transport ourselves back to that day, that was the day after they caught the second bomber in Watertown. And the night before, I had gone to J.J. Foley's after the arrest, because I just, like I do once in a while. And Jerry Foley, the great bartender, said, there's somebody in the back, they want you to come in. And I went in there, and it was Danny Keeler. And Danny Keeler is a sergeant detective, and if you listen to the tapes of what happened on the day of the bombing, there's a voice screaming, "Keep the streets open, keep the road open, keep the ring road open." That was Danny Keeler. And Danny Keeler saved untold lives that day, because that's where the ambulances went to get to all the hospitals. They moved 90 critically wounded people who could have bled out in 30 minutes. And Danny was there in his SWAT uniform, and he was there with a bunch of young cops, some of whom I know, the great Brendan Walsh. And these guys, they didn't want any applause. They didn't want, if you recall, there was applause that night when they walked away after taking him into custody. And it's funny because I never wrote this because I could never get it in the paper, frankly, given the language. But Danny Keeler, when he just had one, Danny's a Marine, but he's sort of a sophisticate. All the cops were drinking beer, but Danny had a red wine, like Dr. Charles, a sophisticate. So, he had just one wine. He said, "I got to get out of here," but he said almost the exact words that David Ortiz would say, which would have been, I think, about 11 hours later. He just said something to the effect, "This is our effing city," or it was very close to what David said. So I was so struck that, because I wasn't at the game, I was just watching it on TV when he said it. And it's funny how many times he has reset it. I mean, he said it on national television after they won that game. But the other thing I'll just remember more as a fan watching that sixth game, when the Fox put up the starting lineups, I just looked at it and it was, wait a minute, of the 8 position players, Ross, Napoli, Drew, Bogarts, Gomes, Victorino, 6 of the 8 position players were not on this team last year. So you talk about redemption. It was a team redeemed, and it was a city redeemed at the same time.
Jenny, you travel with the team. You're around these players constantly. We think of them often as ball players who wear uniforms, but they're people with families, wives, girlfriends, that they left behind that day, the day of Patriots Day, when the team left town. How personally impacted were they? And what was the sense from that moment on, once they learned of the news of what had taken place at the finish line at the marathon, moving forward and the impact that it had on the team?
We were right outside of Fenway Park when the explosions went off, and we were on our buses heading to Cleveland. And I remember I was the first one on our bus because I was sitting in the back on Twitter, and what an amazing game we just had, and spirits are high, and there's fans surrounding our buses and chanting, and I saw on Twitter, and we were so close you would think we would hear it, but something happened at the marathon. So I stood up and I announced to the bus, I said, something's going on. And we normally have a police escort that takes us to Logan. And all of a sudden you see the police escorts take off. And all the fans around us are all staring down at their phones. And everyone just has this look of horror and shock. And I know the players found out shortly after that. And the first thing that we did was we got to the airport and we got on the plane, and we're lucky enough to have satellite TV on the plane, and automatically turned on the coverage. And you're just watching live TV, and you don't feel like this is your city because of the moments that we just had at Fenway Park and what we all know as Marathon Monday is one of the best days in Boston. So it was just this feeling that it was almost disbelief that this was happening, and I'm sure everyone here almost felt like you were watching a movie. It didn't feel real. This couldn't be happening in our city. This couldn't happen at the marathon. So right when we landed in Cleveland, there was a big dinner that night. And normally, I'm sure you all know, when players go out to dinner, there's the pitchers hang out, and the position players hang out, and there's 5 guys are gonna go get hibachi, and these guys are gonna go to a steakhouse. Well, I believe 23 of the guys met up for dinner that night. And I think that alone tells you what a unity this team was from that very moment. And they sat down at that dinner and they said, it is our job as figures here in Boston to try to do whatever we can to try to restore some positivity back into the city and bring some justice and some smiles to the faces of the fans in Boston. So from that moment, the tweets started going out with Boston Strong. Then that built. Then Salty and Gomes came up with the idea to make the jersey, and that was the first thing brought into the dugout that day. And from that moment on, they put it on their backs. And you could see the impact that they had. Not only, as you mentioned, they're people too. They have their families. Some of the families were going towards the marathon right after the game. So once they found out that their immediate families were okay, it was now, what can we do for this city? And that carried on this entire year.
Charles and Steve, I'd like you guys to expound on that as well. And first with Steve, I mean, often athletes want to shy away from that social mantle, so to speak, or carrying the banner in such a way. This team did not. How palpable was that? Or what kind of sense did you get being around that clubhouse every day?
Well, I'm going to start answering that question by pointing out that I sometimes bristle with the notion that what we do in sports is the so-called toy department, that what we do isn't real. And I say this because I was in San Francisco for the earthquake in '89, which I covered for 10 days. I was at the World Series. And I covered 9/11 because I was in New York with the Red Sox. Having said that, the gentleman to my left, I wanted to take a moment to point out that the column I read in the Globe today about Whitey Bulger, I cannot fathom what it must have been like to cover all that for the last several months and to be aware of it for these last 2 or 3 decades and to witness and hear and be part of all that testimony. And the column you wrote today, writing about the trial and Whitey through the lens of a female African-American judge sentencing a known bigot and everything else. So a round of applause for Mr. Cullen, please. Now, having said that, he was introduced as a Pulitzer Prize winner. I was introduced by George as the very handsome Steve Buckley. I will take my laurel over yours. Thank you very much. To answer your question, I believe, and this became a topic late in the season, as far as the Red Sox and players and getting involved in our activities. Now, I have been very critical of David Ortiz. In this very room 2 years ago, in the aftermath of the 2011 season, I criticized David Ortiz for charging into the manager's office to complain about lost RBI. I criticized David Ortiz for this and for that, and for challenging his manager that day at Rogers Center when he was trying to send Mike Lowell up to pinch hit. Never was I happier as a Bostonian to see the Red Sox represent our city the way David Ortiz did on that Saturday afternoon. And a few people sent me emails. How can you, look at the word that he used, the message to the kids. I called my sister, who was an educator for 40 years, and in your district, Senator, my sister Joan Yeager, principal of the Columbus School in Medford, and I asked her about it, and she said, you tell the kids that adults use adult words sometimes and let it go at that. It's not that big a deal. I thought David Ortiz, if I can use the vernacular, I thought David Ortiz spoke very eloquently for a pissed-off populace, and I was quite pleased with what he did. I was quite pleased with the way the Red Sox, the Bruins, the Celtics, and the Patriots picked up the ball, so to speak, and represented our city. I have no issue with that whatsoever, because that's the best way to get the message out sometimes, because these people are in the public eye, they are marquee attractions, and they can speak for us and send their message, and hence our message, out to the broader scope. So I was pleased with what they did.
And Charles, as an innovative thinker who, of course, has overseen such occasions as the 100th anniversary of Fenway Park, what did you make of this organic feeling with those Red Sox players, this community responsibility that they took upon themselves this season?
Well, first, be careful not to learn too much from George Mitrovich about hyperbole in your introductions. You haven't lived till George Mitrovich has introduced you, by the way. Of course, he's introduced all of you, so by now. But thank you. Thank you for the kind words. You know, everything, we're looking at it like it was in the past. It was 7 months ago today. It's so in the present that my dramatic entrance into this room, when I hadn't seen you in the minutes before, was because I was at Fenway addressing Mass General surgeons who are having an event there. And it was, and they wanted someone from the Red Sox to speak. They wanted Larry Lucchino, he couldn't do it. They wanted Sam Kennedy, he couldn't do it. So, you know, they got me. And it was an opportunity to do what we've wanted to do ever since 2:50 p.m. on April 15th. And that was something to help, something to thank, something to convey the compassion that we all feel. Our hearts all broke. And to address these surgeons just now. They're down on the warning track. And Jim Lonborg is speaking to them, hopefully. What time is it? Yep, he should be speaking right now. It's a privilege to get to participate in something that you think has the capacity to be therapeutic. And on that day, on the 15th, we all remembered it was a gorgeous day. We had a great game. Napoli has the walk-off. And we fortunately, coincidentally, inadvertently learned that we saved some people from injury. Why? Because right after the game, we had kids run the bases. And we had about 1,000 participants. And I liked to stay on the third base side, right near Donna's seats, right by the third base dugout, and watch the families as they come off to read the faces. Did they have a good time? We had a lot of people, and they had a really good time. And as I walked up the aisle with my assistant, with Jackie Dempsey, who you know as one of the radiant ball girls on the field, I said, boy, that was a good day. And as we walked into the office, she responded by saying, perfect. And it went through me with a chill, because mankind doesn't get to be perfect. There's only perfection from above. And you know, maybe it's the Jewish Kenahara complex, but like, be careful, you know, don't say that. And by the time we had walked through the red door down to my office, by the way, when the last person ran off the field, I looked up at the clock, it was 2:47. And by the time I walked down the hall, got to my office, we were already seeing it on TV. And everyone is filled with emotion. Fear is one of the emotions, because for all we knew at that time, the story wasn't over. In fact, the story had greater fear in the next little while, because if you remember, there was a fire and possible explosion at the JFK Library. And I get chills as I'm telling you, because when I'm watching that, I realize that if these are multiple attacks on iconic Boston locales, we're next, right now. And while we had received a memo from Human Resources saying, you know, it's fine for you to go home if you want to take care of loved ones or check on friends, when I saw that, I instructed everybody in my area, shut down, leave now, get out, calmly, and we did. But I remember walking out of 4 Yawkey Way and looking at trash cans through a different lens because we already knew to be suspicious. So your life was changed. So then you hear about Jenny, the ball players, all in Cleveland that night. Someone had first come up with the phrase Boston Strong, but we went back to Twitter and checked. It was when Will Middlebrooks retweeted a beautiful sentiment that I need to commit to memory. Something to the effect of, you know, our hearts are with our friends in Boston, or something like that. And he did hashtag Boston Strong. That's when it spiked. He wasn't the first to use it, but his retweet of that hashtag sent it spiking. So that by that night, it was being introduced into our community vocabulary. When, as Jenny said, Johnny Gomes and Jared Saltalamacchia said, let's create this jersey. What are they doing? They're trying to convey symbolically through cloth their compassion for those who are affected. And they and clubhouse manager Tommy McLaughlin did. Okay. Now, the team's coming back from Cleveland, thinking that we're going to play Friday night. And we hear that the ball players want to go visit the hospitals. Music to our ears. We have a community relations department that quietly, humbly, behind the scenes, sets up this year 407 appearances in the community by our players, coaches, and manager. We'll set it up for you. No, we don't want you to set it up. We want to do it ourselves. Okay, well, we'll get you the cars. No, we want to do it ourselves. And they couldn't go the next day because we were shut down, shelter in place, lockdown. But then they could a couple days later. And 25 players broke into 5 groups of 5 and went to the hospitals. We wanted to help them. No, they wanted to perform the behavioral act of action.
They didn't want the media to know either. They wanted to do it out of the goodness of their hearts and knowing that hopefully they can make an impact. They didn't want any media coverage. They didn't want to talk about it in the clubhouse. It was purely just for the victims and first responders.
So now, while they're in Cleveland, we start to draft a ceremony for what we think is Friday night. I start working on it Wednesday night, rewrite it Thursday night. I remember hitting a writing groove about 9:30 Thursday night. Things seemed to quiet down in the office. And Sarah McKenna, my friend and colleague and great collaborator on all the complex ceremonies, is in her office. I'm in mine. She said, "You watching TV?" I said, "No, why?" She says, "Police officer just got killed in Cambridge." I'm like, wow, what a week. Not linking the two at all. Well, we're then independently, yet concurrently watching this on the news while writing a ceremony that's changing as the events are changing. Our offices, you know where they are at Fenway. We have police flying by on Brookline Avenue. She and I leave at about 1 in the morning. And you then watch the Odyssey on television. And I have an apartment that overlooks Longwood Medical. You're watching it there. There are police and FBI flying all over. So we are completely immersed in the emotion of it. Thank God spared of the tragedy, but completely immersed in it. And on Friday, you wake up to a blizzard without the snow. Just nothing. And several of us are emailing, and finally couldn't resist, walked up to Fenway about 1:30, and it was like looking at a Hollywood set, totally lifeless. There is no animation. There are no cars. The stores are closed. It's a ghost town, but it looks like a Hollywood set. Now, you're working on the ceremony that you still think you might have. Then we hear the game's postponed. And And then you hear, resume your lives. That was a cause for concern. You're telling me we're going to have 35,000 people over for lunch tomorrow, and you have this person or people, who knows how many, on the loose. Lucchino calls about 6 o'clock. I said, this isn't good. I know. We'll just keep going. I said, fine. 34 years with Lucchino. We know each other inside out. And then an hour later, boom, capture. And there's a whole new emotion. So the week was filled, to me, with 3 kinds of emotions. Sorrow and sadness, followed by resolve and resilience, followed by triumph. However, you can't end on the note of triumph. You have to go back to sorrow and sadness because of the wounded, because of the traumatized, because of the bereaved. And that's how we realized we were on a triangular carousel of emotions that we're still on. And that's why, as each patient that we learned of would try to return to normalcy, we wanted to be the arms into which they came. As each hero was willing to be identified, we wanted to be that because we're the largest civic gathering place. So here's the thing. Our players, independently, were doing all these altruistic acts that we weren't participating in. And then when we did bring the folks to Fenway, the players exploded with the sweetest compassion. We know these folks now. We know Heather Abbott and Mary Daniel, who, and by the way, Kevin, I only knew who Mary Daniel was because this beautiful article that Eric Moskowitz, who I don't know, wrote in the Globe, and I emailed him like, who is she? Can we find her? And just all year long, just slowly, they came back. And not everyone has, but my goodness, when the family of Martin Richard came in the playoffs, they were finally ready, because we had been in touch with them all summer long. And the little girl stood there. I mean, we were no good. And it's not over. It doesn't end. It becomes part of our culture. It gets interwoven. And so with the parade, we went to see the mayor the morning after we won. And it's the mayor's parade. Don't forget that. It's the mayor's parade. And so the mayor led the meeting. Larry Lucchino, Tom Werner, myself, Sarah McKenna are there. And the mayor said, I want to do something special. I want to do something, this was a hell of a year. I want to do something special. And in the discussion, it was, let's have the parade pause for just a moment. You know, again, in Judaic culture, when you get married, right before the wedding is finished, you step on a glass. Why? To pause in a moment of joyousness to remember, right? To remember the past, to remember the destruction of the temple. You pause for just a moment. And as Jenny said, it was Johnny Gomes and Jared Saltalamacchi who had the idea that night of April 15th. And so it was they who we wanted to have come down off the ducks and present the jerseys. And what happened was really beyond what we thought, and that was that the symbolism of the cloth as a symbol of compassion, gave way to the actual human connection that the cloth was designed to represent. And there were a lot of tears at that scene right there. And then it was time to celebrate. And the drop kicks kicked it up, and we were shipping up to Boston. But it still goes on, and that's why we thank the surgeons tonight at Fenway.
Dick, is that connection? As that connection was being strengthened between the team on the field and the fans, of course, the team was winning. It sustained the momentum of the moment on Marathon Day with that late dramatic victory all season long. You're a guy who's captured the history of Boston baseball through your poetry. What were you thinking as one of the voices of Fenway Park as this team began to recapture the hearts of its fan base and continued to build on the early season success, the 18-win April, en route to 97 wins overall?
Well, First of all, I was under the impression that this was going to be a celebratory occasion. I've been in tears for the last half hour, for God's sake. There's been some talk on David Ortiz, and I have a little piece of business that might be appropriate. Start carving the statue. Get the site ready, right on the sidewalk between Yaz and Teddy. He's king of clutch hitting. Fit him for the crown, get driving instructions to old Cooperstown. He's our Hall of Famer, he'll get there with ease. The Pope will proclaim him St. David Ortiz. To us, he's Big Poppy, we love it that way. The big pops in his bat when he saves the day. Other teams fear him from east to west coast. He launches those big bombs when it matters most. On the day that the plaque that he is installed in the hall, Sox Nation will be there, his fans, one and all. And when that hall plaque is put into his reach, we pray that he'll launch no F-bombs in his speech. Thank you very much.
And on that note, let's talk about the likability of this team and the phenomenon of the bearded Red Sox, of Three Little Birds, and all that transpired as the season went along. Steve and Jenny, again, covering it from a baseball point of view. Most substantial early sign for you that there was something different, something special about this group of Red Sox?
I think first and foremost, it was at spring training. Just coming in, and especially last year was my first year with the Red Sox, so things certainly changed in year two. But coming into spring training and just walking into that clubhouse, the energy that I think John Farrell brought and all the players that were brought in this year with the veterans and the talent that this team already had, it was a different feel. There was a different energy about it. There was a different vibe in there. You can feel that the players all were coming together, and very early on. And I've talked to a bunch of the players, and they've said, you know, after a few months, you almost feel like a brotherhood of your team. It was right at spring training that there was something special about this group.
I'm glad I didn't have to speak after Dick Flavin. Well, when I was a kid, when the Red Sox won the pennant in '67, which is the reason I'm here tonight is because of the '67 Red Sox. And frankly, the reason you're here is because of the '67 Red Sox, because that set in motion all that was to follow. Red Sox Nation, and so forth. And I remember when Billy Rohr threw the one-hitter at Yankee Stadium, very early, the third game of the season, and it's in the impossible dream. Then they traveled to Yankee Stadium for an early April game, and the kid pitcher from Toronto knocked on the door to fame, written by John Connolly, an old reporter for Channel 5, a news reporter. And even as a kid, I remember thinking, it's barely an hour into the season, but my friends and I in school were talking about, and you were there, Ed, and you got the sense, like, wow, things might be different this year. And of course, how can you say that in April? Having said that, I agree with Jenny 100%, because I was in spring training for 3 weeks. And more importantly for this discussion, I was there the first 2 weeks. The word that I applied to the Red Sox, and by the way, I speak as one very candidly who will tell you that I predicted the Red Sox would win 77 games. But I gave myself an out clause because I said they would win. And it just seems so nonsensical now to say it, but I said, they'll win a respectable 77 games. And I said, we'll see Bogarts and Jackie Bradley Jr., and we'll see these young kids and workmen. We'll see them emerge and grow as a team. They'll stink, but it'll be respectable. And how wrong I was. But even then, as Jenny pointed out, the word that kept coming back to me more than anything else, and this is before Marathon Day and before so much was to unfold historically, the word that kept coming back to me was something that was sorely lacking the year before: accountability. There was no accountability on this team the year before, from top to bottom. Everybody had a bad season. The ownership, right down to the clubhouse kids. Everything went wrong. And it got so bad that it was uncomfortable to be there. We couldn't wait for the season to get over. And I challenge you to disagree with the point I'm about to make. The worst part about the 2013 season was that it ended. that it ended. Because as a guy who's covered baseball for 35 years, who's been around, I covered the Yankees, all these different 23 World Series, it was fun. And I'm not afraid to say that. I'll rip them when ripping is needed. I'll applaud them when applauding is needed. But driving home from Kenmore Square that night and going up Storrow Drive, I'm thinking, oh, geez, that's it. It's over. And I felt the same way in '67. They lost Game 7 to Bob Gibson, 7-2. But the worst part about '67, beyond the fact that they did not win, was that it was over. And it had become so much a part of this 11-year-old's life. And there's a different interest in the team, obviously, because of what I do for a living. But that doesn't mean I'm heartless. It doesn't mean I don't have family and friends. And it doesn't mean that as a connoisseur of baseball, I don't enjoy the drama that unfolds on a nightly basis. Because surely I did. Accountability is what made it so much fun for me this year, because you would go in there after a game. And I remember Jake Peavy, after that bad outing in Detroit in the ALCS, we walk in with our sledgehammers and our manacles and everything. Where is he? And he's standing there waiting for us. It's like he's standing right here, like, come on, right here, let's get it all. And so many times in years past, when a guy would have a bad game, he'd be that guy out the door and you couldn't find him. Not that particular guy. But that, to me, was the way it was all season long. The one guy you knew would be there when the game was over was the guy who screwed up. And I love that about this team.
And Kevin, on that note, that accountability, and also though this team had star quality, nonetheless, a large group of these guys were grinders. And these were guys that were somewhat of journeymen in Major League Baseball.
And to follow up on what Eddie said earlier, and I must point out that Eddie and I are both from Malden, and usually when two guys in Malden are sitting in a room, they call it a conspiracy. But what Eddie said, really resonated with me. This is probably heresy to say this. I enjoyed this more than 2004. I thought they were going to win in 2004. I thought they were going to win in 2003. I knew they were going to win in 2007. And I think anybody that puts their hand up and says, I really thought these guys are going to win it. First of all, the other thing I recall, the Bruins went so deep in the playoffs, nobody paid attention to this team. And I remember I was down in Florida selling Whitey books, and I talked to Charles, and shameless self-promotion. No. It's nice to talk about between the white lines instead of Whitey. I'm so sick of that scumbag. But we talked, and it was, we had that great, the fellow, who's the great Orioles beat writer? Ken Nygren. We were just talking baseball. It was great. And I remember what you said, something like what Steve said. The team was going to be likable. It was going to be, and I think, I don't want to put you in a bad spot. I thought you were thinking 15 games over 500, somewhere around there, or would that 10 to 15? I thought you said 10 to 15. I thought you said 10 to 15, but you liked them because we didn't like that team. It wasn't just that they lost; it's the way they lost. And this team, it wasn't just that they won; it was the way they won. And it also, that's why I think it had so much to do with the resiliency of the town, because they were grinders. There were, I mean, obviously Pedroia, he's in one league. Ortiz is going to go to the Hall of Fame and all that, but the rest of them, none of those guys. I mean, I just thought they played as a team. I thought John Farrell showed the kind of leadership. If you treat grown men to play a child's game like grown men, they will respond as grown men. And I thought it was just a fun team to watch. And we got on it all came up on us like, the Bruins are done, we're all crying. And then you said, wow, the Red Sox are in first place. and it just, we picked up from there, and every month, I really didn't, I must say, I did not, when I looked at the matchups, both Detroit and then with the Cardinals, I really did not think that they might I didn't think they'd pull it off. I thought that pitching, and I think Jim Leland is thinking maybe I shouldn't have paid so much to those pitch counts in those games. But the other thing I'll never forget, we'll always remember Big Papi's home run. And Steve Horgan with the hands up and all that thing. But you know what I'll always remember in terms of emotionally for me that game? Jane Richard, the little girl who lost her leg and lost her brother, came out and led, she was wearing a PD shirt, and she led the St. Anne's Choir out there to sing the national anthem. And I don't care what anybody says. You can't tell me that didn't have something to do with what happened that night. It was magic to watch her. It was magic to see what Poppy did. And I hope one day we get to see Janie dance again, because she's a great little step dancer.
Senator, your thoughts?
Yeah, great. Thank you. You go in on the orange line. Billy Rohr has won a game against the Yankees, a one-hitter. And up until then, maybe 8,000 people, 10,000 people were going to Red Sox games. And 6 of us went in on the orange line from Malden to see Billy Rohr now pitch against the Yankees a week later. And he wins again. He's got 2 wins. He's a lefty. We haven't had a lefty since Mel Parnell. And he's won 2 games. By the way, the only 2 games he will ever win in the major leagues. But we are there. And we know something magical is going to happen here, but we don't know why, and we don't know how far it's going to go, but something special is happening. And that's what began on that day in Fenway Park that Dr. Charles orchestrated, huh? And these guys with the beards. You know, I said to the president, make the people at HHS grow beards until they make that website work, okay? Or hire John Farrell, one or the other, okay? One or the other. Because the teamwork was something special, huh? And it's kind of, you know, during that Senate race, I was here in January for Bob Ryan, my classmate at BC. You know, we did a thing here in January. Then I'm running for the Senate, and I have my stubs. I have a stub for Game 7 in 1967, standing room. I have a stub for 1975, standing room. Huh? Then I went to Game 2 for this World Series, and we lost. The first World Series game we had lost since 1986. So now I'm thinking, do I go to Game 6? Okay, do I go to Game 6? Okay, do I go there? And John Kerry had given me his seat, so I decided to give him my seat for Game 6, okay? And I think he got by far the better part of that deal. So, you know, it was, you know, for me, a very special deal. And as I was in this Senate race in April and May and June, and I had been chairman of telecommunications, passing all these laws in the 1990s to create this broadband revolution. Well, one of the things you can do with your iPad and a sling box is sling the Red Sox to you. Because when you finish giving a speech in Pittsfield at 10 o'clock at night, and Kevin will tell you this, that's why it's Pittsfield Day at Fenway Park, okay? So we haven't spent a lot of time out there, okay? It's Maine Day at Fenway Park. So it looks like a small state as you're flying over it, but in a vehicle, 2 hours and 45 minutes, and I'm just driving back from Pittsfield with my sling box, watching the Red Sox win these walk-off games night after night, week after week. And not only is it making me feel better, it's making everybody feel better, huh? And you could see the emotion, the spirit that they had at each game as they were, you know, collectively, you know, coming together. And in a way, they did something for us that we never really had after 9/11, because people forgot that the 2 planes that were hijacked on 9/11 by Mohammed Atta and the other 9, well, they had been riding around here as cab drivers, you know, sitting and scoping out Logan Airport for a year. And there were 150 of us on that plane, those 2 planes that flew into the World Trade Center. And that traumatized us. But we didn't have something like the Red Sox. We didn't have that extra spirit in the city. And it was very special this year, the role that the Red Sox could play, you know, day after day, just helping people to make it through this very, very difficult time. And people ask me, what is a senator like? And I said, it's really like going from the American League to the National League. And it's kind of weird watching David Ortiz actually play first base, you know what I mean, during the World Series. It's kind of like watching Ted Cruz recite green eggs and ham, you know, on the Senate floor for 21 hours in a row. And for him, and what they were saying is, if they don't cancel Obamacare, we're going to shut down the government. which would be like the Detroit Tigers saying that they were going to cancel the World Series because they didn't make it. Huh? But we're going to have Obamacare, and the Red Sox are the world's champions. Huh? And so, it was a tremendous, tremendous gift that you gave. And I had a bet with Claire McCaskill from St. Louis, and she made a huge contribution to the Dana-Farber. With the 54 senators that we meet each Tuesday, Harry Reid then asked me and Claire to get up and to talk about what the World Series game had meant. And so I tried in my own way, just in 2 minutes, to capture what the Red Sox had meant to the entire city and what it had meant to have Salty and Johnny Gomes at the finish line, at the marathon on that day, and that it was one of the most perfect endings that you could ever ask for to be presented as a gift to the city by a team that really did care. And we thank you, Dr. Charles, for everything you did to us.
It's all the circumstances that are around them. If the vote was held 2 weeks earlier, John Farrell would have been elected Manager of the Year. If it was held 2 weeks later, John Farrell would have been elected Manager of the Year. You have to remember what happened at the very end of the season. The Cleveland Indians won their final 10 games of the year to squeak in ahead of the Rangers, and Terry Francona, who really, it was amazing what he did. He did the whole thing, with Band-Aids and, silly putty. I don't know. He didn't have much of a team, but to get them into the playoffs was an amazing thing. But John Farrell was the perfect manager this year, and he was a player's manager, but he's got that toughness about him. I don't think anyone's gonna cross him or try to get away with anything with John Farrell. But what a ride this has been! What a ride this has been, huh? We'll never forget this. We'll never forget this. The 2004 was something because it was the first time in any of our lives that it happened, and a lot of us, after 2003, would say, "Oh my God, it's never going to happen for us," and so that and a lot of us are out, bringing tickets and pennants and putting them on grave sites and all that sort of thing. But for the whole run of the season, these guys were just amazing. And I have to admit, I'm not one of those who thought early on that this was going to happen. Matter of fact, the opening day, the home opener, I was the PA announcer for home opening day. And it was a sellout, 781st sellout in a row. And the game after, I made my debut. They had 5,000 fewer people in the stands. I thought, my God, at this rate, if they keep me on as a PA announcer, the place will be a vacant lot by July. But the way they won, as everyone here has said, was truly inspiring. It was just terrific. These guys like each other. I did an event in the middle of September at Fenway Park, and it was a VIP kind of event, and before I was to get up to speak, they had a player show up to pose for photographs, and he was going to do a Q&A, and it was Ryan Dempster. And a guy asked Dempster, he said, "What is it that seems to make this team different than any of the other teams?" And Dempster said, back in spring training, he said, I got to the clubhouse early one day, and Johnny Gomes was there. And I said, "Hi, Johnny, how are you doing?" And Johnny said, "Well, I'm one day closer to the parade." And someone else was there and said, "Gee, you shouldn't say that. You're going to jinx us. This is over." And Dempster said, No, that's why they pay us. They pay us to ride in the parade after the season is over. We got to think about it. We got to talk about it. We got to plan about it. And and Dempster said, that's how we've been the whole way. And this has been a whole magical ride this whole year of 2013. We'll never forget it.
Charles, speaking of Johnny Gomes, what about the beards? When did that really, I don't want to say take shape or really enjoy its growth spurt, but from your standpoint, when did that really become something that this team could cling to and rally around?
To me, it was a later season symbol of the unity that was present right from the start. When 8 months ago today, I had the honor of meeting Kevin Cullen. It was March 15th when he came to spring training to promote the book that I urge you all to read, just to pay tribute to what he's had to go through for decades of studying Whitey Bulger. But when we did talk about this team would be likable, you already felt the unity and the camaraderie. The hair came later, and Jenny may remember it better. I guess it was it Napoli who went first? No, it was Gomes who went first. It was you tell the story of the beards.
Okay. So Napoli showed up to spring training with a nice shaped beard, nothing crazy. And Johnny Gomes had a little facial hair as well. And apparently they were talking one day in the clubhouse. And Johnny was like, oh, I might shave. Napoli was like, you can't shave. And that's where it all started. So they made a pact that day that they wouldn't shave their beards for the entire season. And as Dr. Charles said, I think other players started joining on. Some players tried and failed. Jacoby, it took a little longer, but he got there. But it was something that started very early at spring training where they decided, and it really was Napoli and Johnny Gomes that said, this is what we're going to do this year because, and people also asked about they also shaved things into the back of their heads, and I would get tons of tweets of what, do they have 3 lines? What's going on there? And it's just what I like to say is boys having fun. They're just a bunch of players just enjoying what they're doing and having fun with their best friends. And it was one of those things like, oh, it's cool to shave 3 lines in the back of your head. And they'd convince themselves that it was something that could be cool and the entire team would do it. But what it shows is unity and that they were just having a good time.
I don't want to go off script. I apologize, but I just wanted to ask Jenny, did you notice that the GQ guys were the last ones to sign off on this? No, think about it. No, roll back the season in your head. And the GQ guy, Middlebrooks, Jacoby Ellsbury, Stephen Drew, and so forth, they were the ones that, not so much. Like Napoli looks like the old Warner Brothers cartoon with the scar butt and the beard growth, swinging 5 times against Bugs Bunny in that old Warner Brothers cartoon. That's Napoli. You know those guys. Johnny Gomes, Shane Victorino, his eyes are like pie plates, like, look at me. But, and am I the only one that noticed this, that these were the guys like Middlebrooks? I don't know. I kind of look the way it is now. Stephen Drew, Jacoby. They jumped on board because they were pushed off board.
It's true. It's true. But they all looked good. They all looked good.
What did you think, Dick?
I did a little poem. This was, I had only done it the night before. This was the morning of the rolling rally of the parade. I had to read it that morning, but I think I have it down now. In 2012, the Red Sox wound up in last place. They stunk, but the team got us back in the race. In 2013, they hit and they threw and they slid. They won the World Series. That's what those guys did. They hustled, they bustled, they played hard, they gave. In fact, they did everything except shave. In the springtime, whenever someone hit a double, you'd notice it on his face with some stubble. As spring turned to summer, there started a buzz. The more times they won, the more fuzz there was. The season wore on, the pace became brisker. They kept winning games, sometimes by a whisker. By the time it was over, this sounds kind of weird, just about every guy had a beard. So now we can say how they got all those wins. They won by the hair on their chinny chin chin.
Has anyone ever met a human poetry jukebox before? That's amazing. The one thing I would add to it, while the beards were the symbolism of the unity, why? Why did we have a team so unified? That wasn't happenstance. That wasn't by chance. What was so gratifying to those of us who worked in the office this year was to feel not only the restoration of vertical and horizontal harmony throughout the organization, but to feel harmony at the best level that any of us who were part of the group that came in 2002 had ever felt in our time in Boston. And when you look back with lament over 2011, which I was glad I wasn't here for. I was living in Milwaukee. When you'd rather live in Milwaukee, you know it must have been bad here. And when you look back at the discord, the unhappiness in 2012, take a look at this. You can look at baseball through many lenses. The regular lens is to look at bats and balls and grass and dirt and sun and sky. It's a very physical game. But there's another lens that I think it's so rewarding to study in a year like this, and it's the lens of the synergies of human relationships. They matter, and the synergies of these relationships matter, and they let you do that which very few, if any, thought was possible. So many times, well-meaning people will teach children, oh no, that's not realistic. What does that word mean? Does it mean that which you, the advisor, has experienced in your lifetime? Does it mean that which you have read about in history? Because it's not realistic to come back from 3 games to none to the New York Yankees because it's never happened before, yet it was possible. And it was not realistic to think that a team that won 69 games the year before would win the World Series the next year. But it was done. Why did it happen? Among the contributing reasons was the restoration of harmonious relationships. You can win without it. It's a lot more fun when you win with it. When you brought on John Farrell, look at what you did. On the baseball side, it was relief. That's who Ben Cherington wanted. It's who Ben wanted the year before. It's who Lucchino wanted the year before. Let's not forget that. It's who Mike Hazen had worked with in Cleveland when John Farrell was director of the farm system. When he hired new coaches, and he hired Juan Nieves, I said to John Farrell, do you know Juan Nieves? He said, Charles, we were roommates in winter ball in 1987. That was the length and the breadth of those relationships. And it goes throughout. And like children in a home that can be tense and unhappy, or children in a home where it's solid as a rock, you could feel it. The players could feel it. We in the office could feel it. On the business side, we were already solid. Look at the length of relationships that we have. Henry, Werner, Lucchino, all together since 2002. As I said, Larry and I started working together 34 years ago. Think of that. Sam Kennedy came aboard with us in 96, so about 17 years together. Jonathan Galula, Sarah McKenna, both in 98 in San Diego. We all know each other inside out. We have known too much about each other. You know, we knew each other's girlfriends. I introduced Lucchino to Stacy. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes, it's not. But we know each other. We've stayed over each other's houses. It's very familial. And you get everything that goes with a family. But we're tight. We're a tight group. And it's not easy to break us on the business side. But in 2012, you had all these rookie year relationships. Larry's first year working with Ben as a GM. Ben and Larry's first year working with Bobby Valentine. Bobby's first year working with some of his coaches. First year that some of them were working with players. If you're going to have rookie year relationships, you can't afford to make a mistake in the spotlight that is Boston. So now, you restore harmony with trusting relationships, and Ben seeks to acquire a particular kind of player, and he does. Because what did all those free agents have in common? They all had something in common. They had all played championship baseball in the recent or preceding years. Johnny Gomes wants to tell you, I didn't go from worst to first. I went from first to first. He's right. You remember Mike Napoli in the World Series for Anaheim? You remember him in the World Series for Texas? You You remember David Ross in postseason 6 times? Do you remember what Shane Victorino did to, in my brief time of 2 years with the Dodgers, his Phillies beat us out for the World Series? These go right on down the line. Ryan Dempster, even though he had spent so much time with the Cubs, even they had been in postseason with him against my Dodgers in 2008. These were players who knew winning baseball, championship baseball. That's a different game, I assert, than performance baseball. I've seen performance baseball. Enormously talented athletes go 2 for 4. They lose the game 4-3. They go to dinner. I did my part. It doesn't answer the question, you did your part to what? To lose? I got mine. I got my 2 for 4. Don't blame me. They don't mean to be different from championship players, but they're not necessarily in an environment where winning is the reward, where you're taught that winning is more fun than performance baseball. And we assembled Ben Cherington, Mike Hazen, Brian O'Halloran, assembled players who understood what it means to be a champion. We talk about grinders, not big name players. Exactly. That's who wins the championships. That's what we had this year.
We don't have a lot of time left, and we haven't talked a lot about the actual baseball.
Take the
played
mic
on
away
field.
from me.
But Steve and Jenny, let's talk about the obstacles this team overcame before it had to overcome obstruction. They lost 2 closers. Hanrahan Bailey go down. They lose a guy who was arguably the best pitcher in the American League for the first half of the season, certainly for the first 2 months for a prolonged stretch. What stands out for you two as maybe the most significant obstacle this team overcame en route to the championship?
I think in any team you're going to have injuries and there's going to be situations. But the biggest difference that I saw from last year to this year is last year, if something happened or someone went down or the team, gave up 5 runs, it was like the game was over. And maybe that's just my perspective, but it seemed like there was no fight. There was no will. There was just, okay, well, that was that. Let's move on to tomorrow. This year, no matter what the situation was, we could be down 8 runs in the 9th, and you're still on the edge of your seats because you know that this team has the fight in them. I think the biggest thing is no matter what the situation, who was injured, there was always someone to step up. And whether that credits the depth of the organization or just the players that were there at that moment that knew, hey, I need to go and pinch hit in the 8th. I'm going to give it my all, whether it was the Mike Carps or the Johnny Gomes in those situations. There was always someone to step up, and I think that's what's made this team so successful.
One of the things I liked about this team, and we're seeing it now, by the way, in the offseason, with Ben Cherington putting together next year's team, is the maneuverability that he has. And we saw it during the season, that the kid Bogarts could go from short to third, that Pedroia could move to different slots in the order, that Nava could go from left to right to first base. And you keep looking that John Farrell could take a guy who's listed as this and deploy him in a different fashion. Now look what's happening in the postseason. Well, okay, so what's going to happen in right field? Well, if Ellsbury signs somewhere else, maybe they can move Victorino from right to center. What if Stephen Drew doesn't sign? Well, okay, you put Bogarts at short. Well, what happens if Drew does sign? Well, maybe you can put Bogarts at third base. Well, what happens to Middlebrooks? And Ben Cherington says they haven't thought about it yet. I submit that they have thought about it because the reason they won the World Series this year is because they thought about these things. So I think he lies. I think he has considered the possibility. That he has considered the possibility of using Middlebrooks at first base next year. Do you think they lucked into Koji Uehara as their closer this year? I don't think they did. I think they had a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D, and a plan E, because that's what a good business does. What we saw this season, the walk-off wins, the beards, the happiness, all that stuff is great. But what's that? Lackey being an ace. I mean, there's something we haven't even talked about. The guy misses the entire 2012 season. But if you're looking for a sort of a different slant on things, the slant I kept coming back to this season was I love the fact that Farrell could walk in there and more or less say, I need a left fielder. Who's up for it? And 6 guys would say, I'll do it. And that's what would happen. Sign of a very good team.
All right, final moments, final thoughts.
One thing I'll always remember about this season, it was in the ALCS, I raced out of the Globe. The traffic on the expressway was outrageous, so that was my excuse. I went to the Erie Pub in Dorchester. Had a corned beef sandwich, pint of Guinness. And if you know the pub, it's like shaped like an old bar in Boston. It's a U. That's where Reagan went and Clinton went there, but he didn't drink the beer. So the Americans usually stand on one side and the Irish guys are on this side. And I'm usually with the Irish guys. So I'm watching, this is when Koji saved that, it was 1-0, wasn't it? Did he save the ALCS game, was it 1-0? When Napoli hit the home run? So he saves that, and everybody's cheering him on. I noticed the Irish guys were saying, "Come on, Huey. Come on, Huey." And I turned to the Irish guy, I go, "What do you think?" He goes, "That's Huey O'Hara." So I turned to the Irish guy and I said, "Only in Boston could you make a Japanese guy Irish." And the other Irish guy says, "If he blows this save, he's Japanese again."
I have to admit that I was a late convert to thinking this team would do what they ended up doing. You know, I loved them all year long, and they kept winning games. Teams in the past, Red Sox teams in the past, would roll over and die. I didn't really start believing the last week in August. The Red Sox went into Los Angeles, and the Dodgers had won something like 42 out of 47 games. I mean, they were on a ridiculous high, and we took 2 out of 3. And I remember watching on television and saying, "We're as good as those guys." And then the next week, Detroit came here, and we had been in Detroit in June and lost 3 out of 4. And the day after Labor Day, this is the time that I was converted. I said, "Bring on the postseason." We had Max Scherzer going against us, against Leicester. And it was one of the great baseball games of the season, a 2-1 game. We won it 2-1. It was a terrific, beautifully paid game. And I said, bring on the postseason. We're as good as anyone else. We're as good or better than anyone else. We can win this whole thing. And we're going deep into October. We're going to play when it's cold out. And by God, we did. Thank God.
I think for me, it was Game 6 against Detroit, and we're behind. And Shane Victorino has been injured, but he's going to play this game. And it's the 7th inning, and we're behind. And like Jenny was saying, we know they're not giving up. And 38,000 people are sitting on the edge of their seats, too. And his song comes on, "Every Little Thing's Gonna Be All Right." And 38,000 people are singing the song. And then he hits the home run into the left field stands. And as he's coming around, there's 38,000 people singing, "Every Little Thing's Gonna Be All Right." And it was about a ball team, and it was about a city, and it was about that little song replacing Sweet Caroline, actually, as the theme song for 2013 in the city of Boston. And we thank the Red Sox for everything they did.